This is an AMI podcast.
She is a dreamer. She's a believer. She is a doer. She is an achiever. And that she is you. Welcome to AMI Audiobook Review on AMI Audio, the podcast where we chat all things audiobooks. Thanks for joining us. I'm Ramya Amuddin, the host of the show, here with Nisreen Abdelmajid, our technical producer. And we, of course, are just wrapping up March, it seems. I mean, still a couple of days, really, but it's our last episode for March, and we want to continue supporting, recognizing, and celebrating women with our quotes. So the one that kicked us off for today's episode was actually shared by our contributor, Aamer Khan, who's going to join us later on in this show. But, you know, if you're trying to figure out who wrote this quote, how it got shared, how it became big, then you're going to have to tell us, because it's been shared so many times on the Facebook pages of a lot of women we're surrounded by, and it's actually just found everywhere. So if you Google this quote, you'll see how expansive it is. And therefore, I will tell you, maybe not conclusively, but to my knowledge, can't find who exactly it's by. But it is for women, maybe by women, but that's the kind of thing that we're kicking off our show with today. And another thing we like to kick off the show with is, of course, the CELA homepage. We like to take a glance at that. CELAlibrary.ca is where to go for the featured books. That's one of the first headings up there. The Red Palace by June Her. It's a historical mystery that's being featured. Also have Unprotected by Billy Porter. It's an actor's biography. And the final one of the featured category is The Midnight Hour by Ellie Griffiths, Suspense and Thrillers. Now, we haven't had too many things from the CELA blog to feature for you, but we do have one today, and I thought I'd talk about it a little because it is quite relevant for the community. The blog post that's from March 22nd, 2022, had to think about that for a second, is about best books for finding jobs and advancing careers. So things are changing for the better for people with disabilities when it comes to finding work. While many have experienced higher levels of unemployment than the non-disabled workforce, the inclusivity, diversity, equity, and accessibility movement is increasing awareness and commitment to removing these barriers to fuller improvement of employment for people with disabilities. Authors like Daniel Chait and John Strauss, who wrote Talent Makers, How the Best Organizations Win Through Structure and Inclusive Hiring, have noted a shift in commitment for companies and organizations to reduce bias and hiring decisions. They also want to create opportunities for more diverse candidates and build more inclusive teams. So, as the Great Resignation forces companies to find ways to attract and retain valuable staff members, people with disabilities have an improved opportunity to showcase their talents. Whether you're considering a new job or career, or if you just need a little bit of inspiration or to brush up on some employment skills, we can help. That's what the CELA library people say. And if you're a CELA user or a library or an educator or professional supporting people with print disabilities, you can find many career and job finding resources in audio, eCast, and Braille formats in the CELA library of growing books and catalog. So that's on the CELA blog. They go on to give you some specifics on where you can find particular books or kinds of material, categories of material for you as an individual looking for this type of stuff. But it is good to highlight this because it's important to know that these materials are available for us on CELA, but as well in general to give our awareness some more room to grow. Now, to what's trending. Nisreen, you have that for us.
Yeah, browsing on Twitter, audiobooks.com shared this week's hottest releases. So I'm going to list a few of the top 6 books written by women. So we're not just ignoring the men, but we're focusing on the women while
Mm-hmm.
still appreciating women in literature. So we start off with The Recovery Agent by Janet Avenach. We then have French Braid by Anne Taylor, A Sunlit Weapon by Jacqueline Winspear, The Next Thing You Know by Jessica Strasser, Disorientation by Elaine Shachow. The last one I'll mention is A Harmless Lie by Sarah Bladel. So these are the top 6 books. We're just focusing on women, and unfortunately, this is like the last week for Women's Month. So I guess we're back to routine, but we're still gonna focus here and there on women, right, Ramya?
Oh, heck yes. I mean, women in literature overall, Nisreen, the conversations are becoming bigger and stronger and bolder, as we could tell through some of our conversations
Mm-hmm.
throughout the month. Just that, the kind of subjects that we're tackling and talking about, and the kinds of memoirs even that women are putting out for us to discuss, um, speaking their truths, letting us know what's
Yes.
going on with their lives, with the women around them. It is crucial. It is crucial that, we focus on the month as a whole and say, hey guys, let's keep digging deeper. Let's keep finding things. Let's keep sharing and
Mm-hmm.
recognizing, but also throughout the year to say, don't need to put a pause for women in
Yeah.
literature throughout the year
Oh,
because
absolutely.
the content is so much out there. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, the most books that I actually appreciate is the truth behind it. The truth
Hmm.
for women in literature. There's so much to discuss. There's so much to express there. I mean, as we said before, there's a lot to uncover when it comes to women in successful careers like this. And
Yep.
audiobooks, for example, they have full content just describing the truth behind the struggles that we go through, the barriers, the discrimination. There's so much to uncover. There's so many discussions that you can flip through. And for men especially, like, this is something to educate you about what our perspective, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And perspective is a really key word there, because perspective is maybe what was lacking for so many years, when it comes to, even on other shows here on AMI, we've been talking about war and talking
Hmm.
about conflict and conflict resolution, and whether it be, day-to-day individuals in your lives, in your families, or bigger things, bigger events going on around the world, and the kind of perspectives that we may have been missing out on or just not focusing on, that
Hmm.
come from women. And it is, I mean, we could go on forever, but there are other things that
Yeah.
we want to bring up today, just to, put this thought in your head, right? Like that's what we're
It's
trying
been
to
a
do
fun month.
here.
Yeah.
Exactly. We're talking all things audiobooks here on AMI Audiobook Review. I'm your host, Ramia Amuddin, here with Nisreen Abdel Majid. And guys, we're going to do something a little bit flip-floppy than our usual pause or play. I'm not going to call this a pause or play because I've already read this book, and somebody else who's going to join us in a bit has already read this book. So we're going to call it a book recommendation, or maybe a book club recommendation. And the book is called Beyond Vision: The Story of a Blind Rower by Victoria Nolan. This was released in 2014, so let's get to know the title a little bit. Victoria Nolan is a motivational speaker, advocate for people with disabilities, Paralympian, and special education teacher. Having wanted to teach since she was a young child, her dreams were shattered when she became blind, not because of her disability, but because of other people's preconceived ideas about what she could and could not do. Victoria took up rowing to counter her depression over losing her sight and made it onto Canada's national rowing team. This is her personal story of triumph over adversity. Again, released in 2014, this is Beyond Vision by Victoria Nolan. And I'm going to go around the table anyway, as per usual fashion. But Nazreen, coming to you first, is this something that intrigues you to hear Victoria's story about disability, about vision loss, about that side of the journey, but also to toss in there, becoming an elite athlete kind of from nowhere.
How epic is that? That's crazy. I mean, I know it's nothing to compare to, but talking about other people's preconceived ideas about what she could and could not do. I mean, that's something that I've gone through my whole life where it comes
Mhm.
to saying, okay, you can't be an interpreter, you can't be in this program, you can't succeed because of your disability, and if you wear hijab and you're a woman, there's so many preconceived ideas that people have to butt in your life and tell you what you can or cannot do. But how she overcomes that, and she it's just I want to hear her journey. I want to hear how she conquers through all that and gets through all of that. So this sounds like a very inspiring story, and I can't wait to read it.
Oh, totally. And going to what you were saying about relatability, you've gone through this your entire life. You have your own journey of
Hmm.
this concept of people telling you what you can and can't do, or based on other people's perceptions of your disability, they will allow you or disallow you to take part in various parts of life. And that kind of thing super struck out to me as I read this book. There were many times actually that I was very close to tears just from learning about, just from hearing somebody else describe their journey in such detail, because a
Hmm.
book is not it's not the same as having, sitting down and having a conversation with somebody, right? A book is someone's deeper thoughts, deeper experiences, this
Yeah. Yeah.
chronological, laying down of what they've gone through for us to then read later and say, oh my goodness. And there were so many moments where I was like, wow, this is so relatable. And then hearing how she did it, how she went through it, and how she overcame, as you said, or continues to face these challenges with the attitude that she brings to the table. Aamer, I'm coming to you for your thoughts on having read this book and going to be discussing it later on as well with your book club. But just around the topic of disability, a women's experience, and something that we may be familiar to as our own stories, but also hearing her perspective.
Absolutely. I mean, this was actually a recommendation from one of our book club members to be put onto book club, and I took a look at it. And given the synopsis and the fact that I've actually met Victoria Nolan in the past, I chose it. Obviously, we have Women's History Month this month, and it just seemed like such a great fit. But I really didn't know what to expect when taking this book on, in terms of whether it was going to be sort of a hardship kind of story, or if it was going to
Mm-hmm.
be what I like to call overly inspiring, which tends to happen with celebrity autobiographies and memoirs. But I found it was a really great balance. Celebrity memoirs also tend to sort of drag on, especially towards the end. I didn't find any of those things with this particular book. It was very, very well balanced in terms of displaying the hardships, how she overcame them, as well as being inspiring and interesting throughout the entire book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe digestible is like a not the exact term we want to use, but in terms of the pacing, it was very digestible. And as we had discussed online, something that could be, you know, i- impact a reader who is disabled themselves, and somebody could take away from it and learn from it if you haven't experienced disability or haven't had exposure to disability before reading this book. So it does bring in the crowd in almost around the spectrum. But yeah, this is a great one, and of course, familiar voice on AMI TV, Victoria Nolan. So just a great way to kind of wrap it there. Again, Beyond Vision, it is available on CELA, CELAlibrary.ca in human narrated audio. If you're interested in checking it out, that's our recommendation. And now over to you, Aamer, because you've been so busy through March. We've all been busy, but you've been in particular busy with reading. So what have you been reading through March?
I feel like I've been away forever, but it's giving me a
Yeah, no
time to
kidding.
get through quite a few books. But for this month, I thought I'd take a look at all of the books on the CELA homepage. They usually have three, so I call it the hat trick of the CELA homepage.
Mm-hmm.
And I found all three were actually really great picks, and not entirely what I expected, in a very good way. As you described it earlier, the first book, The Red Palace by June Her, it's a historical fiction, but it's more of a murder mystery romance about Korea in the 17th century. And I'm going to try to sort of focus on women because of this month. And this book definitely does that without me having to force anything, because the central character is a nurse, and the author does a great job of sort of finding that perspective of what palace life is like in the 1700s in Korea, and really sort
Right.
of drops the reader right into that time period. So you feel like you're really there. Lots of excitement, lots of intrigue, lots of mystery, but she keeps it really, really real in terms of that particular perspective and narrative.
Okay, and that one, yet, like you said, you did describe to us earlier in the month. So, how about the next book?
Next book is Billy Porter's Unprotected. This was a memoir, and I believe Nasreen mentioned it in one of her Twitter feeds as being one of the most popular celebrity memoirs. And it is really good. Even if you don't know who Billy Porter is, you really don't need to know. I didn't know really who he was, but it is a very inspiring story in a lot of different ways without being sort of over the top or too self-congratulatory. For me personally, it was especially chapters 1 through 5 is, I think, something that anybody and everybody would really enjoy in terms of universal appeal. And like most celebrity memoirs, it does tend to flag a little bit at the end. But his story is truly amazing. You know, there's a lot of LGBTQ plus sort of content in there in terms of perspectives of being a minority. There's also a lot about how world events affect a lot of people. Another really interesting part of this book is that it was written sort of during the pandemic. So a lot of things haven't really come post-pandemic
Oh,
talking about the pandemic in terms of people's perspectives and thoughts and how it may have affected their lives. But in Billy Porter's case, he actually took the time to actually write this book and do a lot of self-searching and self-healing. And it's really well laid out in this book of his.
does he reference the pandemic a lot throughout the book? Like, do you get that time frame?
Not a lot, but he does, and it sort of underscores his journey to heal himself and make himself better. I should mention that it's also narrated by him, which is a total bonus. Very much like Will Smith, he does capture your attention and entertain you while he's reading to you. And it is a sort of a made for audiobook. So it's not just a narrator reading
Right.
text. It's an actual performance.
I'm so glad that's becoming the norm, by the way, that when you're listening to the audiobook, you're not just thinking, did I miss anything? No, they're totally making it an audiobook experience. And then the final one, but not really the final one, in parentheses, is The Midnight Hour by Ellie Griffiths.
Yeah, this one was a bit of a shocker for me because as I read the synopsis and took a look at it in a bit more detail, I realized it was number 6 in a series called the Brighton series. So me being me, I actually went back and read all 5 books first
I
and
knew
then
it.
read the 6th book. But it's interesting because I think it was picked for a reason, the 6th book. The basic synopsis of the Brighton series is that, for those that don't know, Brighton is sort of a seaside town in the UK, I think about 2 hours from London. It's sort of a sleepy place, but sort of a suburban area. And the books are about a detective and a magician who work together to solve crimes. They both, go way back in terms of, being war buddies from the Second World War. But the story basically takes place in the 1950s. So you have that sort of time reference. You have that sort of buddy cop feel. The original narrators for the books were male, which is why it's really interesting to hear the author's note in the 6th book of The Midnight Hour, where she describes that although she started her books off sort of with a male perspective and a male sort of thing in mind, especially throughout the series, you see that her female characters keep growing bigger and more interesting to the
Ah,
point where the 6th book, she requested or made the requirement that this narrator should be female. And to the point where the main character's wife is actually competing with her husband on various things, which I won't get into because I don't want to spoil
ooh.
it. But it's a very interesting look at not just that particular time period, just for the time period's sake, but for how the sort of journey of women's rights came up in that particular part of the world. She does also touch on a lot of other sort of modern day issues like LGBTQ rights, with a soft touch, but the books are primarily a very light sort of murder mystery. I know you and Nasreen were talking about being a little bit taken aback if it was a thriller and, sort of a jump scare horror movie type of thing, but it's really not in that direction. It's actually the complete opposite. They're much lighter. There's a lot more humor.
Yeah, I've been curious more and more about what fits under what category these days because you get to a spectrum of, thriller, a little bit light. Yes, there's still some of that element in there, but not necessarily enough to say, oh, I don't read this type of genre. So glad that you pointed that out as well. So now we're at a grand total of 9 books throughout March, but is there anything else you've been reading? I'm almost nervous to ask.
Absolutely. Just for you, I read Colleen Hoover.
Oh, yay.
Um,
Okay.
And the title is just escaping me at the moment.
All Her Perfects?
All Her Perfects would be the title, All Her Perfects. And this is another sort of really interesting book to read during this month for a woman's perspective. Colleen Hoover does not take on light topics, it looks like, from the various books I've seen. So she does take on heavier emotional topics, but she has a great way of unpacking very complicated subjects and laying them out and taking the reader through that journey. All Her Perfects is really about dealing with marriage at a certain point, and especially with infertility, as well as some other sort of pieces that go with a marriage that's been going on for 7 years. And you see how it begins and you see where they are, and you see those sort of both at the same time as she starts the story from sort of the end and the beginning and sort of meets in the middle. So it has that sort of flashback quality, but in a good way. And you see sort of a real reality of things without being, bored or feeling like you're not getting anything out of it.
Colleen Hoover I almost struggle when I pick up a book from her because I know I will love it. The content, though, can be very, very heavy. For anyone who's a Colleen Hoover fan and just reads, most of her books, there's never just like I want a light book, so I'll go for Colleen Hoover. There's always some real intense, thought-provoking content to, digest, figure out, sit with afterwards. And it's kind of like watching episodes of This Is Us where you're like, I need to breathe after this one to be able to move on to the next one. Did you read any more of her books, Aamer?
Yet? Yeah, I think as I've said, they're fairly heavy books, so I definitely look forward to the next one, but it's not the type of read I would want to do like 2 in a row or 3 in a row.
Yeah.
They are very heavy topics, especially this book. It sort of highlights the fact that even if one person is super dedicated and committed, that it still takes 2, and it's an interesting message to sort of unpack.
Yeah. And in the final couple of minutes, I guess we can talk about something you're looking forward to reading.
Oh no. Okay. Odessa Sea is something I read recently. And it's book number 24 by Clive Cussler. And his book is something like the complete opposite of Colleen Hoover in terms of it's very much an action movie packed into 8 hours or however many hours the book is, almost like a James Bond-esque around the entire world and coming back and things just constantly happening. It was a great book, but what I'm looking forward to is reading number 1 in this series, which was written way back in 1982. So I'm really curious to see how that book may have aged or how those things may affect my read of it.
Wow. I mean, I think that between the, what did we say, 12 books now? 11, 12? Definitely minimum 11 that you've read this book, that we need to start doing book challenges. Nazreen, are you in to go head on head with Aamer?
Yeah, I'm in.
Okay, perfect. So let's get our reading challenges underway, because there's not just the number of books, but the variety of books. It's not even like it was just an 11-book series or something. Aamer, always great catching up with you. Thank you so much for taking the time, and we'll be back with you next month.
Always a pleasure to review, discuss, recommend, browse, conceptualize, and reminisce audiobooks with all of you.
Wow, so good.
Deep. Love it.
Love it. Aamer Khan will join us on the last episode of April. And until then, happy audiobook listening.
This was an AMI podcast. For more accessible media, visit ami.ca.